Well, hey there, Dev Central community. It is that time again. It's Thursday at 12:30 Pacific, and this is Dev Central Connects. I'm John. I'm flying solo today without my buddy Jason, but he should be back next time. But we are excited to connect with you as we always do on Dev Central Connects. We are streaming live to YouTube and Periscope and LinkedIn. So as we always do, make sure you type away those comments down there, and we will interact with you live here on the show. And I just got to highlight this thing really quick first. Pasilva said, hey, welcome to everyone, and thanks to all of you who helped us get to 50,000 subscribers. This is on our Dev Central YouTube channel. We are now over the 50,000 subscriber mark. So that's a pretty amazing thing, and it's, what we do our best to produce great content for all of you, and we appreciate all of you subscribing. So if you have not subscribed, you can certainly subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will continue to crank out a bunch of great content. One other thing that I wanted to highlight here at the beginning is in a week from today, we have a show coming up. It's going to be me and David Warburton, who's over in jolly old England town area, and we're going to talk about the phishing and fraud report. And so he's done a bunch of great work on phishing and fraud and how all that has gone on lately with the F5 Labs team. So make sure you come back next Thursday as well, and we'll talk about that. So anyway, couple of notes here on that 50,000 subscriber milestone. Leaf Zimmerman, I see you out there, my friend. Woot woot. Woot woot. I guess, do you have to give it the little, extra with the woot woot? And then Tony Hines, I see you out there also, my friend. 50,000. Nice. It is nice. It's nice to connect with everybody. It's nice to have everybody subscribe. So today we have an amazing show. And I know we say that probably every week because we always have an amazing show. But today we have our friends in the certification team, the F5 certification team. And we've talked to them a couple times before. We have the pleasure of talking to them again today. And today we are also joined by one of the people that works on the scientific side, like the really deep details of what makes a good test question, what makes a good test, kind of a thing. So we'll introduce all of them here in just a couple minutes, but just to highlight a couple of you as well. AL3S, we're going to give that hand clap. That's awesome. It's good to see you out there. And Sarah Body, good to see you too. Oh yeah, 50,000. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's an exciting time. All right. So like I said, today we're going to talk about certification, talk to the certification team, and specifically about how do you build a good certification exam. And it made me think about maybe some exams that I have seen in the past and some answers to those exams. So I had one right here. I was going to pull up this whole list of examples. But, you may have seen like some of these questions that kids will answer, that kind of thing. And I thought that this would be a good kind of a primer to our conversation today. And I pulled up a test that a kid, gave an answer to, and it was a history test. And I don't even know what grade this student would have been in. But one of the questions on the history exam was, what ended in 1896, right? So the teacher was talking about some historical events about, the world in the late 1800s. And so the question was, what ended in 1896? And the student very wisely, very aptly said 1895, of course, because in 1896, 1895 ended. So anyway, so maybe we could take that as an example of a test question that might or might not be so good. But when it comes to the certification exams at F5, there's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot of science behind it, a lot of thought, a lot of preparation. And we want to talk to the people that do all of that work. So with that, let me welcome our cast of experts today. So first we have the man, the myth, the legend, the one himself, Dr. Ken Salkow. How are you, sir, today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having us on here again. Not to derail things right away, but I was listening to the countdown.
Right.
is the music we play, was that custom designed for us, or am I going to be able to play that on Beat Saber at some time? Because I could really get into that one.
Yeah, you can play that. We'll talk offline about that. But yeah, that's the music that our studio team helped us put together, and so we can share it out. No problem at all, man. No problem. Good to go. Well, Ken, it's always good to see you. So I'm gonna bring in Miss Heidi Streifels as well. Heidi, there you are again, the one who really makes all the magic happen, I feel like, on that certification team, right? So, and I see Ken nodding in approval because we all know the truth, right, Heidi?
Sure.
Awesome, man.
It's definitely not something that's done alone. I rely on the expertise of our subject matter experts, guidance from Ken, and really truly the person you're about to introduce.
That's right. That's right. Well, without any further ado, as they say, let's bring her on. So this is the Psychometrician, which is a title that I can only hope to one day have, although I probably will never have that. But let's bring her on, Miss Jill Vanden Heuvel. Jill, it is great to have you. Welcome to Dev Central Connects. And man, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Great to be here. Great to be here. And I'm a psychometrician, not a psychomagician. So you just need to make sure you don't get those two things confused.
just to clarify.
Yeah.
Maybe right at the outset here, tell us what a psychometrician is. I never even heard of psychometrician until, this experience.
Sure. So psychometricians are trained in all things exam development, design, analysis. So you end up spending way too much time in school. So if you want to avoid the real world, go out and become a psychometrician, because it takes about 5 years of post-grad. So wow. You end up with a PhD at the end, and you get to work with awesome folks like F5 and help them with their certification program, help them with the different exams. As well as getting into the nitty-gritty of items. So it's not just all the overarching thing, but a psychometrician has touched probably everybody's life without them ever realizing it. If you have ever taken a standardized test.
Yes, we all have.
Then
right?
A psychometrician was involved in that somewhere along the line. Teacher-created tests, not necessarily, but standardized assessments, absolutely. A psychometrician was involved somewhere along the way.
And in that regards, many of us may have been touched by Jill specifically.
Maybe. We don't even know it. You know what? Sometimes we say that about F5 technology. We say, hey, you used F5 technology 100 times today, you didn't even know it, and you logged onto that website or whatever. So maybe there's a little bit of comparison there. So yeah. Good stuff.
John, to put it into a little bit of perspective. So I got to, Ken and I worked together for 12 years, and I've known 13 now. I've known how much he loves data. And I didn't think that there was anyone else in the world who could geek out, love, be passionate about data as much as he was until we started working with Jill.
That's amazing.
So our calls tend to be very much data driven, and that's definitely helpful for a program. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes my eyes glaze over. I don't fully understand all of it, but it certainly gets us the exams and the certifications that we need. And Jill, you've been working with us how many years now?
Almost 8.5, almost 9. So I've been working with the F5 certification program since I started working with Alpine Testing Solutions. So it's great, and it's great to be able to partner with the F5 certification team on their exams and everything else. It's been a lot of fun.
So some of us might have thought, before we introduced the psychometrician and all the, the nitty gritty details, and we'll get into that today, like what exactly is the process to develop these tests. Some of us might have thought that, Dr. Ken was just sitting in his robe, maybe playing with a little puzzle or something, and just thought of some great, thought of some great test questions, hey, LTM does this, ASM does that, whatever. But there's actually a lot that goes into this. So I'd love to hear kind of the process of, how do you develop a test question, or do you do one at a time, or is it just like, hey, let's do the whole test, or just that whole thing? What's the process like to get to that?
Sure. If you share my screen real quickly,
yeah, of course.
we can see a quick graphic that just explains the entire exam development process. And so the process starts up here with program design, and that's where folks are figuring out what do we want to do certifications for, tests for? Why do we want to do it? What is the value to the people taking the tests? What's the value to us as an organization sponsoring the tests? And you go right down into the nitty gritty. What is going to be on this test? You think about the test globally, and then you grind down into what is the content that belongs here and what doesn't belong here. That leads into developing an exam blueprint, where you now decide the relative coverage on the exam of each of those areas of content that you decided was important enough to belong on the certification exam. And then we develop and review content down here. And at that point, this is the item writing. Right in here is where we're writing the items and reviewing the items. And if you notice, there's all these double arrows that keep bouncing back and forth. And that's because at every point in the process, we're looking back to prior steps in the process to make sure that we're still on target and we're still doing what we want to do. So every item, when it's reviewed, we review each item back against the blueprint and back against how the minimally qualified candidate was defined and the content that we said was important. Because if somebody can write an amazing test question that has nothing to do with the content we're trying to test, which is an unfortunate circumstance, but it happens. And the only exam items we want to be appearing are those that are related to everything else about that particular test. Once the exam items have all been reviewed and approved, they go to this pre-test and analyze stage. And that's where you really get into the nitty gritty and the numbers and the statistical analysis. And the statistical analysis helps tell us, is the item functioning the way we wanted it to? Do people know what the key is? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? And so forth. And we can talk about that a bit later today as well. And then once items are approved, so not every item that gets pre-tested is approved. Some of them we say, no, that's not going to work. Moving on, either editing it or just saying, we're cutting our losses here. Have a nice day, item. And we come up and we assemble an operational test. We run a standard setting, which is how the cut score decision gets made. So the pass-fail decision point. Again, that's not Ken sitting in a room or Heidi sitting in a room and just going, I think somebody should have to score X to pass this exam. Way more involved. Every step in this process is content experts.
Okay.
Content experts weigh in on every single step, because I don't know F5 content, not at all. But what I know is what the process should look like and how to analyze the data and so forth. Nice. And all of these things point to validity. And validity is talking about the way the scores are used and interpreted. And we want every exam to be fair. We want the scores to be reliable. And we want the exams to be secure. If the exams aren't secure, then the scores don't have a whole lot of meaning. If they're not reliable, they don't have a whole lot of meaning, and they need to be fair to everybody, especially when we think about F5 technologies and the global usage of these technologies. We don't want someone to be disadvantaged simply because of where they're located in the world. We want everything to have the same global meaning for everyone. And so all of these steps in the process really are contributing to making sure that that's true.
Yeah. That's awesome. Go ahead, Ken. Yep.
Yeah, I was just saying, so you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you talked about being data driven, right? And there's a lot of conversations in technology and in business today about being data driven, making decisions based on data. That's not a new concept. And it's something that a lot of places have already done. And it's certainly something that we have always done when it's come to our certification exams. The other thing that I want to point out is you hear Jill talking about this. Some of these words are probably things that people have heard me harp on for the last decade. Things like validity and reliability and security.
Integrity.
Integrity. These are the things that this wheel here is kind of my prayer wheel. This is my religion. And it wasn't when we started this process. I mean, I thought I knew everything about exam development because I'd taken a lot of exams and I knew nothing. But this process and the fact that each step goes back and validates the previous step. And you can take 2 steps forward, but we still got to check to make sure that it matches this. This is why I'm comfortable putting my name on a signature on a certificate that says that X, person Y can do X process. Mm-hmm. It's because we do this. We're not always going to be perfect, as I've said time and time again, but this is what allows me to feel comfortable putting my name and the name of our CEO on those certificates.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth repeating that every block you see on this wheel is represented by our subject matter experts. I might know a little bit more about our domain than Jill does, maybe, but what we have the gift, the great fortune to have are our candidates, our subject matter experts, the people who are passionate about our program, who want to be involved in maintaining all of the things that Ken and Jill have talked about, the integrity, the quality, the validity, the just the content, to make sure, because if you have a good exam, you can create a very strong certification. So when we're doing that initial part of the program design, we're looking at stakeholders from all different parts of the organization, outside of our organization, what makes it even valuable to do. And then when we get into the test design specific to a one domain or one skill set or we recruit based on somebody's eligibility. So if they have achieved that certification and we're refreshing an exam, we'll reach out to our candidates who, again, I've referred to you a billion times as my engineers. And I love you all for that. But we reach out to you to help ensure that we're getting this right. Ken and I are both fully aware that we do not know everything, and we're not going to try to predict what an engineer should know when they're out there actually doing the work. We expect their peers to tell us what they should be doing, what they should be capable of, what's beyond the scope of what they should know and be able to do.
Yeah.
So then we recruit to an even larger group to do the item writing. And items, we'll call them questions as well. It's kind of interchangeable. An item is the whole thing. And there is a strategy to the whole entire item. How it's formatted, what language we use, the repeatable format so that the people taking the exam can get right to the question, right to the heart of what matters. We're not giving them extra fluff. We're not teaching them anything. We are focused on testing them on their knowledge so that they either answer it correctly or they don't know and they get it wrong. So there's that process, engaging with our subject matter experts, engaging with all of these folks who are our customers, our partners, F5ers. These are people who have a lot of experience, people who have a little bit of experience, people from all over the globe. We collectively develop these items with these folks to make sure that we have that diverse pool of items that is globally represented, that has, the quality and the technology that we want, that again goes back to that arrow of how we've defined the blueprint, who that minimally qualified candidate is, and then we help guide them and teach them to write these items in a way that's best presented to those candidates who are taking the exams. And then we get into all of the data review, the quality, the statistical analysis, all the fun stuff to nerd out on, to make sure that those items perform correctly and that they're useful, that they're of any value to us at all.
I love it. Yeah, so I think you have an engineered shirt that you even developed, right? If I remember that right, Heidi?
Yeah, there might have been one.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
They're
Well,
some
hey,
of my favorite people in the world.
of course, we love it. You love them, they love you. Right back. It's awesome. Well, hey, there's a question that came in from one of the people watching this, which is amazing. Actually, before I do that, I wanted to say hi to Tasia Balesi. It's good to see you out there, my man. And then also David Johansson said howdy. So it's howdy right back at you, David. It's good stuff. Hey, so Leaf had a question here, and I'm sorry this is kind of covering up your face there for a second, still on the screen, but I'll take it off. But Leaf said, do psychometricians also work on survey questions? Are there like process overlap between certification and surveys? And then I think Leaf, by the way, corrected himself. He said metrician. Maybe he looked up the correct spelling of psychometrician. Anyway, wanted to see about that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. And it's a great question. Appropriately designed surveys absolutely have psychometricians and similar job roles involved in those processes, making sure that the questions are asking what they're intended to ask and that they're going to result in the answer that provides information to those organizations. So psychometricians work with surveys, they work with market studies, they work with certification exams, educational assessments, everything you can think of that involves quantitative and qualitative data analysis. There's somebody who is a psychometrician or something very similar as their background that's involved in those processes.
Nice. So it's good to know. I mean, which kind of makes sense. You know, you think about a survey trying to accomplish a certain thing, and then a test trying to accomplish, you know, maybe a similar kind of a thing. So awesome. Right. Hey, so another question came in, and actually I'm gonna bring us back just right here for a quick second while we answer a couple of these questions. Pasilva asked, since Jill joined the development process, how has the exam development changed over the years? So Jill, maybe you can answer that, or maybe Heidi and Ken maybe chime in a little bit. So
fortunately, she started right away.
Nice. Okay.
But I will say that as we've refined our process and honed in on what works, what doesn't, we've adjusted, we've pivoted on what we needed to do. I think we've just continued to improve the process as we go, as we get better at it. And also, Jill is really good about giving us, and all of the Alpine organization is really good about giving us, here's what we would recommend you do, your best, the best process, the best way you could do this. It is your choice if you would like to follow our best recommendations. Generally, we do. Pretty much 99.9% of the time, we do. It doesn't always lead to the most popular responses, but it's certainly at the full outcome, looking long term, it's always the right thing to do. Like Ken said, we can always put our name and feel proud about the exams and certifications that we develop because of it. And I know Ken has some thoughts on this one too, for sure.
Yeah. The conversation usually goes, hey, Jill, what if we did this? And Jill goes, well, we could. Here's the things you should think about. That's pretty much how it goes. So,
and let me show you the data to support that decision.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, I kind of envision it like, yeah, Ken, you could do it that way, or you could do it right.
I've taken it that way a few times.
You know, so however you want to proceed there, you know, whatever. But anyway, Jill, you had something?
Yeah, so amazingly, the field I'm in actually has its own set of professional standards about how to develop good exams and what to consider and everything else. So when Ken and Heidi come and ask questions, I'm always kind of referencing back to what does the field say should be done? What are best practices? But then the reality is that you have to figure out what the organizational constraints are. Like, what is F5 able to do from a candidate perspective, from a sponsoring organization perspective, and figure out a way to get as close as you can to those best practices while recognizing that in the real world, there are constraints. You don't have unlimited money. You don't have unlimited people who want to take your exams. You don't have unlimited content experts to just keep churning out exam items necessarily. So the recommendations are always talking through those things and thinking through them. And to Heidi's point, over the years, we've been able to refine and improve the process. And a lot of that is be really, truly partnering and a true partnership between Alpine and F5, such that Alpine's learned what does and doesn't work with F5 content experts and everything else, and what their goals are, what Heidi and Ken's goals are. And then we can always make sure that the recommendations we're putting forward are aligned with everybody's goals, as well as recognizing what the various constraints are. So it's a good give and take. But folks frequently will say to me, well, you just picked that. Well, no, I mean, I didn't just pick to say something. There's actually like professional standards around this that I had to learn and be able to defend. And so
yeah,
it's a lot of give and take.
There's a lot that goes into it. Yeah.
Yep.
John, there's actually this whole process can be tested because there's an excellent question that came in.
Yeah, on the LinkedIn user, right? Yeah, let's bring that up real quick. So yeah, so the basic, so for Jill, your opinion on testing remotely, and obviously with like coronavirus and everyone's at home right now, whatever, how do you do that today? And then what are some additional measures to protect the integrity? Do you have multiple cameras to show the person's not cheating, or, but anyway, the whole remote testing thing, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Ken's totally just setting me up here. And as he giggles, all of you can recognize that that's exactly what he's doing. So remote testing is probably here to stay as a reality due to coronavirus, COVID-19, and so forth. The question becomes, how secure is it, and how secure does it need to be for the type of exam you're administering and for the inferences somebody's going to make of the scores from that exam? So we've all done remote proctoring over our lives when we've taken training courses, and at the end, there's questions. Some of them are remote proctored. Some of them are just, answer the questions, we don't care. But remote proctoring has all different levels of security and involvement, from someone looking at you the entire time to computer AI watching somebody's eye movements to see if it looks like they're looking at a screen, to a candidate just knowing that somebody could pop in and look at them at any moment, but they also know that they're not being watched the entire time. All of those things happen. And there's trade-offs in all of it. What are the concerns about somebody taking a screenshot of your item? Mm-hmm. Is it possible for somebody to have a cheat sheet on the other side of their monitor? Mm-hmm. How do you avoid all of those things? And there's been some really great work from organizations who've been handling the COVID-19 situation and the need for assessments to be delivered remotely and yet securely. And the reason that I said that Ken was setting me up is because in the world of IT, which is where I spend 90% of my time, the reality is the people we're testing in IT all know how to get around the remote proctoring stuff. Right. Because they do. I mean, all of you guys know all of those things. I've learned some amazing lessons from all of you when I've done workshops about what I should and shouldn't be doing on a computer, because what else is sitting out there in the ethers? And so that's one of the considerations that's somewhat unique to IT certification exams, is that you're testing the people who know how to circumvent every security protocol you have put in place. So how do you do that securely? Mm-hmm. It's different if the people that you are assessing don't have an IT background and have no way of knowing how to break into their computer. I mean, my mom's still convinced there's a button on the computer, you hit it and the computer blows up. She's sure that that's the case, and that any web link you ever click in your life was nefarious. There's no such thing as a good web link in her mind. No. Right. But so if you gave her a remote proctored exam, I promise it's still secure. 100%.
Right.
But IT folks, depending on what their specialties are, maybe not. Yeah. So Ken has his own opinions for the F5 certification program that I will let him and Heidi discuss, because again, you always want to make sure that what the meaning of the scores is. And so remote proctored or brick and mortar proctored, you want those scores to have the same meaning. And that's where that decision really how that all boils down. So Ken?
Yeah.
No, I could just return to, that validity wheel. I mean, if you look at how much effort goes into developing the exam itself, right? How much time and effort we put into writing questions that are appropriate and testing them and formatting them and putting them through the process and getting to them. It's not a question about whether remote proctoring is good or bad. It's the question of what degree can we utilize that given what we put into it. And it's not just a question about remote proctoring. I happen to like remote proctoring. I've always thought that is advantageous to the community, because we're talking about people. If anybody's read any of my writing, I'm a big proponent of using professional certification in lieu of college degrees. There's plenty of research out there that says you get much better bang for your buck getting an industry certification than you do getting a 4-year college degree. So many of the people who would go down that track, they need to have convenience. They need to have low costs. It is far less costly to deliver exams online than it is in a testing center. So I'm fully aware of all the advantages. The problem really gets down to that whole system of thinking, which is if we do online proctoring, I can no longer trust that those items are not known to users who are taking the test after a very short period of time. And currently, we're not able to refresh our exams as quickly as we'd like. Once that exam has been exposed, once it's out there and the questions are known, those results are meaningless. It has no value whatsoever to us. So it's really about online proctoring is a small portion of it. And there are companies out there in the tech field that they can refresh their exams. I constantly praise CompTIA. I think that they have a great program. And I think last time I checked, they're refreshing their exams every 6 weeks. I don't know how, there's no way we could do that in our program, but that's what they do. And so they can do that. For them to deliver online exams, a 6-week window is a pretty small time for somebody to steal all their questions, put them together, publish them, get them out to the internet, and have it affect the actual reliability of their exams. For us, it's just simply not an option. So.
Yeah, and I pulled this back up, this validity wheel, just to highlight that central part, that validity, the reliability, the security that you're talking about, and that's an aspect that I hadn't really thought through fully until right now. That as you do the remote thing and someone's sitting there with their phone, recording the entire thing, or Jill, you talked about all the workarounds or whatever. Then suddenly this is not reliable anymore, or it's a very short shelf life. And as you go along this entire wheel, you can't just do that in a day or whatever, right? I mean, that's a long process to do it correctly. And so, that's a really interesting thing to think about.
And at the heart of our,
go. I was just gonna say, I'll ask you one thing. Can you identify the video camera in the bookcase behind me?
Ken, is this a trick question?
Which one?
Ken, I feel like, really quick, Ken, I feel like one of those books is kind of like the Bat Cave, where you can pull on it and it opens up this whole portal or something. But that's a different Dev Central Connect show.
Yeah, that's different.
Anyway, Heidi, you had something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is not something new, but at the heart of our program are candidates. And none of us like to reward bad behavior. And we think it's a huge reward if somebody achieves a certification. If they have worked hard, they've studied, they've got the experience, they've prepared, they've done the work. Why would you want to give it to the person next to you who didn't do anything and took a shortcut and cheated, and then shows up and you've got to work with this person and they can't do the job? So
and they get paid the same as you
or more
because they got hired after you.
That one really adds a little hurt to it.
Yeah.
So we want to continue to make sure, and we evaluate this all the time, and we are constantly looking at it and seeing what we can do to make improvements. But for those candidates who put in the time and the effort, who deserve and should be recognized for achieving the certification, that they're the only ones who are getting it. No one's going to be able to go out and buy a certification or just get grandfathered into something because of whatever reason. It's the people who work toward it and achieve it that we want to recognize. And those are the ones who we love, that are just great for part of our program.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the value, the amount of effort that goes into writing just those items, if we may.
Please, of course.
Jill?
So
what it takes to write an item.
So writing an item,
Yep.
so writing an item takes a lot more than folks think about. And on my screen are just some top 5 guidelines when folks write items, but a lot goes into it. And so for the top one, does the item focus on a single concept? Does it ask a single question? The types of questions that get difficult are when you say, well, what happens if you do this and this and this? And then the person trying to answer has to walk through all of these steps. And then the responses are multiple steps. And the thing I hate most when I help folks write items is when I hear, and it happens every time during a workshop, and you'll hear a content expert go, "Ooh, that one's really tricky." That makes me shudder. The items shouldn't be tricky. They can be hard. They can be complicated. They can be complex. It shouldn't be tricky. If somebody knows the content, they should be able to get the question correct. And if they don't know the content, they shouldn't be able to get it correct.
Yeah.
And so these guidelines help focus item writers on what are the most important elements of writing a good item. So the second thing, did you write the item at the same cognitive level as the objective? So the learning objective or the exam objective. People process information differently. And the example I always love to give, because we've all been there, is your multiplication tables. At this point in your life, you've memorized them, either to 10 or 12 or whatever number your school went to. But we have those memorized. Well, when you were in first grade, you didn't have those memorized, and you had to think through what a multiplication problem meant when you were younger. And so right now, a multiplication problem, 4 times 4, you just know the answer is 16. It's recall. It's right there. But when you were way younger and just learning multiplication, you had to actually analyze the question you were being given. What am I being asked? I'm asking for 4 and 4. Okay, so it's 4 groups of 4 things. And then I need to combine all of those. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you had to count it to get to 16.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so when you were younger, 4 times 4 was a much higher cognitive complexity than it is now.
Yeah.
So making sure that the questions are targeted to the person who's supposed to pass the exam. Sounds easy. Isn't always, because especially those of us, again, multiplication, we have those multiplication tables memorized. It can be hard to work with children sometimes, and you're like, yeah, I mean, 6 times 7. And they're thinking 6 times 7.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, come on, it's just 42. Like, why is this taking you time?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing can happen during item writing. The experts forget what was hard for the non-expert. Avoiding the use of the words not and except. The human brain skips those words in questions. There's been a ton of research that shows that you can bold, you can make it red, you can make it flash on a computer screen. For reasons we don't entirely understand, people read questions and want it to be worded positively and don't see those negative statements. And then they get the question wrong, not because they didn't know it, but because they didn't read one word. Now,
It's an entirely different question.
right.
Yeah.
And reading the whole question, yes, you should absolutely do that. But given that there's so much research that says that people don't see those negative statements, avoid them. There's no reason for them to be there. We try to avoid which statement is true. You need to include the focus of the item up in the stem. So Heidi before had talked about the fact that there's lots of parts to an exam item. And one of those parts is the actual question that's being posed to the candidate or the student, the test taker. The other parts of that are the response options. One of those response options is correct and is the key, and the rest of them are distractors. It's important for those distractors to be plausible, because if they're not plausible, then even if I don't know the content, I can probably guess the correct answer because I know that these other three things, there's no way it could be those because I'm being tested on this material and this isn't related. And finally, does each option logically answer the question? And that avoids the questions that end with all of the above, none of the above, both A and C, true, false, which folks love. But if the answer is A and C, then ask the test taker to choose two. And you know, which two elements do you need in order for X to happen? Choose two. Well, now you have your both A and C, but you've asked them the question in a way that logically answers. So these are some of the top 5 item writing guidelines. And these are just in terms of what are the hardest things to fix if an item is written and has used one of these missteps. But also in item writing is paying attention to who the candidate is who's going to pass the exam. Not the expert, not the super expert, but the person who's just going to pass the exam. Yeah. We all go to doctors. We have no idea if our doctor got just one question right and passed the exam, or if they got a 100% correct. We have no idea because the decision was that wherever that cut score was, they knew enough to earn the title of doctor. Yeah. And so who is the person that knows enough to be certified in whatever the content area is? And again, that can be difficult for content experts, but item writing is a long process. It's mentally taxing. It can be fun. A lot of fun. I think it's fun, but not everybody does. I'll totally admit that. But there's a lot of work that goes into it and making sure that the items you write are quality, because if they're not, then you've gone through this whole process and now you don't have good items to put on your exam. And your exam has limited real estate. There's only a certain number of items that you can ask because you only have a certain amount of time. And so it's making sure that every item you ask is quality and important.
Yeah.
For any subject matter expert with an F5 who's helped do the item writing development or done the workshops and written items, if these rules should be very familiar to you, they're also the ones that will help you when you take another exam outside of the F5 exams to identify the correct answer without knowing the domain whatsoever. These rules are here for a reason, and they're to determine if the candidate knows it or they don't. It takes away all that extra stuff that gets in the way, confuses people, trips them up, which we don't want to do. So yeah, anyone who's in the group today who's participated in item writing knows these and probably has utilized them in other exams that they've taken.
Yeah,
it all goes back to validity, right?
Yeah.
Right. And another piece to that is also using simplified language so that the language has the same meaning globally. If everybody a good example is the use of acronyms. If there are multiple meanings for an acronym that are appropriate within a content area, then you need to spell that acronym out. But there's also places especially in the world of IT, where if you spelled the words out, people would be like,
no idea.
What? Because all they know it as is now the acronym. And so it's important to find the right balance for the content. And so these are some of the guidelines. There's more. Come write items with us. It's fun.
we've also standardized on language and formatting as much as we can. Jill mentioned that there's a finite amount of items that we can present on an exam. There's a finite amount of time. So we want to make sure that we're getting to that question quickly, and that it's easily understood for our candidates to identify what information they need to answer it. We want them to get it wrong because they don't know the technology, not because they don't understand the question. And I will repeat that a lot because it helps us really simplify very complicated technology into simple questions. A lot of you who've taken exams probably recognize or are familiar with the big IP administrator needs to do this, or what should the LTM specialist do? So we really try to keep the format consistent and familiar.
Yeah. It's really cool to think that, hey, there are these guidelines, and as you go through these, it makes sense to me, from the outside looking in. It's like, okay, yeah, it's something I didn't really think about, but it makes sense. So yeah, that's super cool to know that we've got these guidelines. So I know go ahead.
We haven't even gotten to the cool stuff yet, John.
I know, man. So imagine how cool that is. Well, hey, so I know we've got about a little over 10 minutes left here. The time always flies by on these things. I love this. So Jason, my good buddy, had put together some questions. And so I was going to share maybe a couple of those very quickly, but then Jill, I wanted to see the analysis, kind of the analysis part. There's a spreadsheet that you've got where you can show. So maybe very quickly, I'm gonna show some of Jason's questions that he just on his own. He was like, hey, maybe I'll come up with some Jason's question analysis instead of certification. So here's one, and I'll just read it really quickly that he came up with. The Big IP administrator reviews a security advisory that the traffic management user interface has a remote code execution vulnerability and undisclosed pages and has several systems with exposed interfaces. All right, so you got a Big IP, several exposed interfaces. How should the Big IP administrator best ensure system integrity? And he used the thing that you just talked about here, Jill, choose 3 instead of, A, B, and C or whatever, right? So maybe good check mark to Jason on that one, which, by the way, for those watching, if you've paid attention to some of the recent vulnerability stuff, this is CVE 2020-5902, which is a huge thing that F5 Big IP, had going earlier this year. But anyway, so with this question, he gives all the different answers. And for him, I think just the way that he logically steps through the answers is he'll say, okay, which of these does not make any sense? So if I'm going to choose 3, then logically I'm going to say, okay, that second to last one, he put a line through it. And if I'm going to restrict access to the management port or restrict access to the management port and any self-IP with the traffic management user interface port enabled, that one makes more sense. So that's going to be one of my 3. And then he steps through and he says, okay, look for indicators of compromise. And after patching, restore from backup. So that makes sense in his mind. And then finally, either patch only the exposed Big IPs or patch all the Big IPs. So, that's a way to look at it. And then mitigate the threat with HTTPD property updates on exposed Big IPs. So that was just kind of the way that he stepped through that, when you are given all those different, options to choose 3 of them. And then quickly, the next one that I'll mention here, and then we can look at some of the detailed analysis of how you would take the results of this, Jill, and kind of statistically show which ones are good or bad or whatever. Big IP administrator has DataGuard configured in the ASM security policy instead of masking the credit card data and social security numbers, which is what it's supposed to do. That's the purpose of DataGuard. On response pages, they now receive a support ID, which is a block page. It's almost like, hey, you're not allowed to even do anything. And it's like, well, that's not right. So he says here, what is most likely the problem? And so there's only one correct answer on this one. So in his mind, he's like, okay, DataGuard is not enabled. Well, you can see up there, it's kind of hard to see with the font, but DataGuard is enabled. And then masked data is not enabled. And you can see there, and again, I know it's hard to see, but masked data actually is enabled. So both of those would be not a good answer on this one. And then enforcement policy is incomplete, or in the policy violations, DataGuard is set to block. And so again, most likely, if you're getting a support ID response page, it's probably because the policy violation is set to block for data guard, and because that's what the blocking action is. It gives you a support ID page rather than an actual masked, sensitive data number kind of thing. So anyway, one of the things that I was looking at on this one as I was reviewing these is, he says, what is most likely the problem? And I thought, I don't know if, not to badmouth Jason at all, but I don't know, is that a good approach to say, hey, what's most likely? Because then people could say, well, I could argue that it's the other one because that's, most likely is kind of that squishy land or whatever. So anyway, so those are a few things, Jason. So I just want to say thanks to Jason for putting those together and giving us some examples. So I'm gonna come back off of that. And Jill, I'll let you. I know you've got your spreadsheet here, so maybe you could talk through, some of the analysis of what you look at, after questions have been developed and people have taken them. And so now what do we look at to say, hey, let's keep that, let's throw it away, let's, whatever.
Right. Thank you. So this is a snapshot of some of the analysis. Ken and Heidi can both attest to the fact that this report typically has a whole lot more worksheets in it and information. But I stripped it down to what was most critical for us to look at within this conversation today. And really what I want to do is just look and explain to folks that there isn't a single number that decides whether an item is keep or delete. P-value is the difficulty of the item. It's the percentage of people who saw the item who answered correctly. There isn't a single way to say this item is awful, this item is great. I'll point you to this row here. Every single person who saw this item, all 63 people, responded correctly. 100% of people got that correct. Well, if everyone gets the answer correct, then we might not actually need that item on the exam because it's not adding any information about what the person who should pass versus shouldn't pass knows and is able to do, because everybody already knows it. So we're probably not going to keep that item. So right here, we've just got these TEs, which are saying that more than 95% of candidates responded to the item correctly. We can also have THs when fewer than 10% of candidates respond correctly. And these flags simply say, hey, let's look at this content to make sure that we're testing what we want to be testing. It doesn't automatically mean that an item is deleted. These keep delete decisions are not, they're automatically populated, but they're not set in stone by any means. There can be items that we say, it's hard, but yeah, it's a differentiator and we need it. And even there can even be items that are easy, but we say we still need it. It is a differentiator, not 100% of people got it correct. One of the items that I just wanted to point out real quickly, because we were just talking about Jason's items and the different response options and distractors. You can have items that are not flagged statistically. They weren't, this item, 29% of the candidates got it correct. And what it was flagged though was a response option. And so we come over to this option analysis tab, and here is that item. And we're looking at how that item performed. And we're looking at, for each of the possible response options where the key is indicated with the little caret there, but what was happening with the response options. And so the columns F, G, H, and I are looking at people's total scores on the exam. So there are approximately 4 even buckets of folks. Clearly, they're not totally even. We have 22 people in this bucket and 8 in this bucket, but that's because we can't divide people in half. So they either scored between 55 and 100 or up to 101. Like it's just, we can't make halves of people. So when we think about it, what we can think about is lower scoring candidates, higher scoring candidates. And the reason this item was flagged was because for the key, again, 29% of the candidates responded correctly. And the people responding correctly had a variety of total scores. Some of them were low scores, some of them were high scores. But when we look at response option A, that was pretty attractive, again, across all candidates, but also to the high ability candidates. So 64% of all candidates chose response option A. And so I would say to Heidi, can you just make sure, like, talk to your content experts, make sure response option A can't be correct. Because if it can be correct, this item either needs to become a choose to, or it just needs to be removed. And initially it would be removed. If possible, it would be revised, and then it would be pre-tested. But every item that appears on an F5 certification exam has gone through this statistical analysis, and keys have been verified. It doesn't mean that we're all infallible. Things happen, but every item is reviewed, and there is a statistical analysis done in an attempt to make sure that only the best items and the best performing items will remain on the exam. Again, pointing back to the validity of the scores. We want everything to be correct and have appropriate meaning. So this is just a very quick snapshot because I'm trying to be respectful of time here, and I suspect you're going to want to wrap things up too. But we really do. We look through lots of statistics and look at how the items are performing. This correlation column is looking at what is the relationship between someone's score on the item and their total score. And what you want is that relationship to be good and high. So if everybody responds to the item correctly, there's like no correlation because everybody got it correct. It had no relationship with their score. Whereas some other items have a good relationship with the total score. And what that means is the higher your score is, the more likely it is that you responded to that item correctly. And the lower your total score is, the more likely it is that you didn't respond correctly. So lots of statistics go into this, and we pay attention to absolutely all of them. No stone goes unturned. We even look at the comments that are provided by candidates when they take the exam to determine, okay, so is there a problem with the content in this item? Does the item belong on this exam or somewhere else? And so forth. So there really is a lot of work behind the scenes. And so for those folks who say, well, but I took a beta exam and it took a long time to get a score, or I didn't get a score. Why does this matter? This is why it matters, to make sure that we get the best possible content on the actual exams. And I'll stop talking because I could talk about this for hours, but I had like 4 minutes. So
No. You did a great job. I appreciate it, Joe. Yep.
I'll just jump in because Marcus asked a question about would that item be rated for the exam? Yep. And the answer is it depends, because I don't actually know. As Jill said, what we would do is we would go and talk to SMEs again and ask about that specific response, the distractor, and whether it was valid or not. If it's absolutely wrong, that's the other statistics suggest that's a really good question because it was differentiating people. And so it would very much depend upon what we heard from the SMEs when we go back to it. You guys wonder why it takes us so long to put together an exam. There it is.
There it is. But
and to just reiterate for Ken and to Marcus for Ken, all the beta items go through this process before they go on a live form. And then the beta candidate rescore is only conducted on the best of the items from the beta forms. Not every item on a beta form ends up contributing to a score for someone who took a beta form. So that's important. So it depends whether or not that item will show up on the actual exam. But if it does, then yes, a beta candidate would be scored against it. If they're not, they would not be scored against it.
That's good to know as well. That's awesome. That's awesome. Which I gotta say to Marcus Schleywick, he's my buddy over. He said hi as well. He's over in Germany. We were talking about Germany actually before we started today. So guten Abend there, my friend Marcus. Herabos. I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Well, hey, a couple of other quick things, and then I know we're at time. I tell you, man, we could just go on forever. I feel like like I said, these things go on. These things just go by so quick. But one quick thing, and I wanted to give him a chance to have this question up there. But Mark said that he took a couple of exams. He was glad to see that the scrolling issues with the exhibits. So this pops up on the screen. Hey, check out this exhibit. But some questions still required scrolling to read it, even though the screen could have supported it. So anyway, that's kind of more of provider screen question. But any thoughts on that?
We are testing. Yeah, we test the exams once they've been published as best we can. We try to catch all of those. Thank you for understanding when that happens. It displays properly for us before we send it out the door. What happens once it's out the door, sometimes with those testing centers, we do not have complete control of. So that's heartbreaking to hear, but also good to hear. Before we jump off, I want to also share this message. It's tomorrow.
Everyone, yeah. So maybe that's a good transition there, Ms. Heidi. I was gonna say to all of our viewers and everyone that would listen to this anytime in the future on YouTube or LinkedIn or Periscope or whatever, happy birthday to Dr. Ken. I was gonna sing happy birthday, but
it already happened once today on a Zoom call. We don't need to do that again.
Yeah. So anyway, but happy birthday, Dr. Ken. We would ask how old you are, but we'll just say that you're 1 year wiser than you used to be, right? So yeah. Well, hey man, we want to say happy birthday. We appreciate you, and we're thankful for everything you do for F5 and everyone that comes in contact with you.
Well, thanks for having us on the show again and giving us time, and everything Jill does is fascinating. So if anybody wants to know more, they can always ping me. I can somewhat translate.
That's right. Well, awesome. Well, hey, Jill, again, thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of the detailed data analysis, statistics, all the stuff, the processes. It's amazing to know, the intensity, the process, all that goes into these exams. So thanks so much for being here.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I was able to talk through it with everybody.
Fantastic. All right. Well, and Heidi, you as well. Thanks again. It's always a pleasure to hang with the certification team. It just, it's always a great day whenever I get to do that. So really appreciate
Thank you. It's lots of fun being with you guys.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to say goodbye to the three of you. And with that, I am going to say, this has been another great edition of Dev Central Connects. It's great to connect with all of you in the community. I know we say this every time, but the community is what it is because of all of you. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you do and the way that you connect with us and with each other. So I would just encourage you to keep doing that. Join us next week, next Thursday at 12:30 Pacific, where I will talk to Mr. David Warburton about the phishing and fraud report and all the craziness that goes on with that. So that's going to be a really fascinating conversation. So I'd encourage you to come back then. And until then, I will say thanks for watching this edition of Dev Central Connects, and we will see all of you out there in the